we welcome Simon Sinek to the stage. Simon, welcome. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. I thought what I'd do is share with you a little bit about what I'm working on now. I'm actually writing a new book that's completely fascinated me. I've become completely engrossed with the subject. It's all based on game theory. In game theory, there are two types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed-upon objective, like football. We all agree what the rules are. At the end of the game, whoever has more points is the winner, and we all go home. Then you have an infinite game. An infinite game is defined as known and unknown players. The rules are changeable, and the objective is to perpetuate the game, to keep the game in play. When you pit a finite player versus a finite player, the system is stable. Football is stable. When you pit an infinite player versus an infinite player, the system is also stable. Like the Cold War was stable, because there cannot be a winner or a loser. The goal is to just keep the game in play. And because there are no winners or losers in an infinite contest, what happens is players drop out of the game when they run out of the will or the resources to play, and other players will replace them. But the game keeps going, with or without them. Problems emerge when you pit a finite player versus an infinite player, because a finite player is playing to win, and an infinite player is playing to keep playing. So this is what happened with the United States and Vietnam. The Americans were trying to beat the Viet Cong, and the North Vietnamese would fight for as long as is necessary. And America found itself necessarily in quagmire. This is the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, where the Soviets were trying to win, and the Mujahideen were fighting for their lives. And necessarily the Soviet Union found themselves in quagmire until they ran out of the will or the resources to play, and they left the game, is what happens. So if you think about the game of business, the game of business is an infinite contest. There's no such thing as winning the game of business, right? It doesn't exist. The game of business has existed longer than every single company that exists on the planet today, and it will outlast every single company that exists on the planet today. But if you listen to the language that most companies use, they don't know the game they're playing. They talk about beating their competition. They talk about being number one, based on what agreed upon metrics? Profits, revenue, market share, number of employees, square footage, over what agreed upon time frame? A quarter, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? I didn't agree to your standards, so how can you declare yourself the winner? How can you declare yourself number one? In other words, companies can say whatever they want if we haven't agreed to the standards. Every single bankruptcy is a company that has run out of the will or the resources to play, and they drop out of the game. That doesn't mean the game ends. Another company will replace them. Almost every merger and acquisition are when companies declare that we no longer have the will or the resources to continue to play by ourselves, so we have to merge our resources with another company so that we can stay in the game. In other words, most companies don't last because they are playing the wrong game. The infinite players are the ones that frustrate their competitors. So I spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit for Apple. At the Microsoft summit, I would say that 80% of the executives spent the vast majority of their presentations talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with their vision, one was obsessed with where they were going, the other one was obsessed with beating their competition. Guess which one is frustrated in this competition? Because the finite player is playing against its competitors, and the infinite player is playing against themselves. The infinite player wakes up every single day and says, how do we be better this week than we were last week? How do we perform better next month than we did this month? It's a game of constant improvement. It is totally fine to study our competition for tactical reasons, but the number of companies that study their competition for strategic reasons is scary, which means they react strategically to their competition and will change entire business models on basically on a whim, which means the company has no stability and is going all over the place. In other words, you're wasting time and resources. And you're frustrating the people on the inside because they don't know where they're going. It's a constant game of reaction. A long time ago, in a previous life, I used to work at an ad agency. And I was a junior kid, and I worked in the competitive analysis department. And I worked on one of the telephone company clients that we had. And my job was to report to the client on what the competition was doing. Now, the number of other telephone companies that existed in America that day was quite a long list. And the client couldn't afford to study them all. So we studied a handful of them. So think about that for a second. They're studying their competition, but they're only studying some of their competition. Well, what about all the others? Not to mention the fact that in the infinite game, it's usually the competitors we don't know about that take us down, not the ones we do know about. MySpace had no idea that Facebook even existed until it completely destroyed their company because they were so focused on the ones they did know about. And I find that fascinating because remember, in the infinite game, we don't always know who all the competitors are. So at the end of my talk at Microsoft, they gave me a gift. They gave me the new Zune when it was a thing. Zune was the competitor to the iPod. And this thing was gorgeous. An absolutely spectacular piece of technology. Beautifully designed. The user interface was beautiful. It was intuitive and simple. It was a really remarkable piece of technology. It didn't work with iTunes, which means I couldn't use it, which is a different problem. But the technology itself was really quite sophisticated and quite stunning. So after I got done with my talk at Apple, I'm in the back of a taxi with a very senior Apple executive, sort of employee number 12 kind of guy. And I decided to stir the pot. And I turned to him, I said, you know, Microsoft gave me their new Zune, I said to him. And it is so much better than your iPod Touch. To which he responded, I have no doubt. Conversation over. Because the infinite player understands that sometimes you're ahead and sometimes you're behind. And sometimes your product is better and sometimes it's not. The goal is not to win every battle. The goal is to outlast the competition. You let the competitor compete against itself and drive itself down to zero while you're out there improving your systems constantly. This is what it means to play the infinite game. And I've become totally fascinated by this because the companies that frustrate their competitors, the ones that seem unbeatable, the ones that everybody targets but seems unable to reach, accidentally are playing the infinite game. So in the US, Costco frustrates Walmart. But if you listen to Jim Senegal, the founder of Costco, he talks about building a business for the next 50 or 100 years, not for the next 1 year or 1 quarter for Wall Street. He talks about the need to take care of his employees first, his customers second, his shareholders third, because that's the way he will build a long-lasting company. And it is true, when we prioritize the needs of the shareholders, which, by the way, is the equivalent of a coach prioritizing prioritizing the wants of the fans over the needs of the players. That's what shareholder supremacy is. That doesn't build a strong, stable team. You may win a game, you may even win a tournament, but you won't build a team that can win year after year after year after year. Southwest Airlines frustrates all the other airlines in America because they're competing against themselves. They put their employee number 1, they put their customer number 2, they put their shareholder number 3. That is the order in which you play the infinite game because that is the order in which you build stability. But companies that have it in the reverse order go out of business or are merged or acquired because they run out of the will or the resources to compete by themselves. I'm totally fascinated by this. The vast, vast, vast majority of businesses don't know the game that they're playing, don't know the game that they're in, which means we're all playing by the wrong rules. This has completely changed the way we do business in our company, where we've adjusted and are adjusting and learning to adjust our systems for a more infinite scenario. So for example, think about how we incentivize behavior, right? Usually what we do is we give someone an arbitrary target to hit, usually in an arbitrary time frame. It's usually a year, and the reason it's a year is because that's when we pay taxes. If we pay taxes every 18 months, those would be our arbitrary dates, right? But there's nothing magical about 12 months. It's arbitrary, right? So we give somebody an arbitrary target, sales, revenues, whatever it is, on an arbitrary date, see in a year from now. And if they hit that target, we bonus them and say, good job. And if they miss that target, we say, better luck next time, right? But if we're playing the infinite game, and this is what we started doing, we become more preoccupied with the trend over the absolute target that they hit. So for example, what if somebody's building really good solid systems that are showing really good incremental growth, really stable, good, solid incremental growth, but by the time we hit 12 months, they're short. They miss the target. You're damn right I'm going to bonus that person, because what they're doing is they're building the right systems that I can see will hit the target. I can see it. Will hit the target 15 months from now. In other words, we got the date wrong. It's the date that should adjust, not the other way around. Versus somebody who hits the target, but if I go back and look at what they did, and it looks like their performance is this, and they're stabbing people in the back, and they're beg, borrowing, and stealing, and dropping the price, and doing whatever it takes to make the sale, because they got to hit the target, and on the right day, on the right time, we bonus them, which is rewarding them for building an unstable company. The trend matters. Sometimes it hits the date, sometimes it doesn't. The dates are there to help guide us, to help set a pace and a tempo. But if you're running a marathon, and you want to run a 4-hour marathon, and at your half marathon, you've got an hour and 57 minutes, you're happy. But if you're at 2 hours and 13 minutes, you don't quit. You just got the pace wrong. And we don't do this in business. We put the date instead of the systems. I don't understand that. We are adjusting. Even the way we talk about money has changed for us. So if you look at our P&L, we actually do not have a line on our P&L that says profit. Doesn't exist. We have a line that says freedom, right? Because money buys us freedom. The freedom to say no to clients we don't want to work with. The freedom to say yes to clients we do want to work with but don't have any money. It gives us the freedom to take a holiday, to pay our staff better, to give it away, to support charities, whatever we want to do. And you're damn right I want more freedom next month than I do this month, than I have this month. You're damn right. And that's what money affords us. But it's all contextualized. And what the amazing thing is it does is it gels the company together. Because now our whole team is working towards the opportunity to give rather than the opportunity to reward themselves. Our team, because we're much more interested in the systems and the trend, we find that they're much better at helping each other hit goals and targets because absolutes no longer get you rewards. It's the underlying systems, which is super stable. And for entrepreneurs, we all live with the fear, or at least the acknowledgement, that our companies are very much built on us, if you're the founder. It's my personality, it's me, my idea, those kinds of things. And if I were to get hit by a bus, the likelihood of the company closing is very, very high. That's called finite. The question is, have you built a company that could survive you getting hit by a bus? That the employees believe in the cause and the vision so much that the systems are so stable. You've built redundancy into the system that anybody can do somebody else's job. There's at least one person who can do somebody else's job. That the company can self-sustain and the employees would want to keep the business going without you. Because they believe that the cause is big enough that they would continue without you. I can say with absolute certainty that if anything were to happen to me, my entire team would continue working. They would continue working to see this vision that we have come to life and figure out new ways without me. I play one piece in the machine. That's it, just one. It might be the most public one, but it's only one piece. And like I said, I've become absolutely fascinated by how can we compete in a game if we don't even know what game we're in. And then we drop out and somebody else replaces us. And nobody's sorry or nobody calls you a loser. You haven't lost anything, but you're not a winner if you stay in the game either. This is wonderful. So the question is, how do you do this? What does it require? So as is my nature, I have to write things on boards. That's a joke. So the infinite game exists up here. The finite game exists down here. Right? The infinite game includes the why, what I call our purpose, cause, or belief. It's the vision of the company. It's where we're going. It's something that we will never practically reach in our lifetimes or ever, but we will die trying. That's the point, right? It's different from a big, hairy, audacious goal, which for all practical purposes you could reach. It may be difficult, but you could reach it. This is an ideal. It's a vision of the world. So my vision, I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired to go to work, feel safe when they're there, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. That is my vision, right? We will never practically get there, but we will die trying. The United States was founded with a document called the Declaration of Independence, in which the document stated, all men are created equal. Now, the United States has not achieved that, and will never achieve that. But the country is at its best when we're trying to achieve that. Civil rights, women's suffrage, gay rights, the universal education, universal health care, etc., etc. This is where our values exist. Our values are timeless. They do not change every year whenever we have a strategic offsite, and if they do, you have a problem. That happens in big companies. Every few years, a new CEO comes in and they have a values thing, and they change, and they change, and they change. No. Your values are your values, right? And they're based on your founders, and they exist from patterns of how you operate when you are operating at your natural best. When your company is operating at its natural best, when all cylinders are firing, when you're in the flow, whatever euphemism you want to use, there is a pattern that emerges, and that pattern are your values. There's a minimum of 3, there's no more than 5. If there's more than 5, there's usually redundancy. You can find overlap, that you can find lowest common denominators. And they are intractable. These things are inherently intangible and hard to measure, right? Which is why they often get brushed aside. It's not that they don't exist, they're just hard to measure. Then down here you have the finite. It's what I call the what. It's all the tangible stuff, right? Things like our interests exist down here. Because they are tangible, they are inherently easy to see and easy to measure, like products sold, money taken in, things like that, right? Number of clients we have. The way you build an infinite business is you want to run all decisions first through your values and your cause, and then through your interests. That's how it works. So what does a values-based decision look like? So when we send our military to battle, they will go onto the battlefield, and if they wound a bad guy, we will send our medics onto the battlefield to pull the wounded enemy off the battlefield. We will put them in our helicopters, fly them to our hospitals, put them in our hospital beds, and our doctors will use our medicine to nurse them back to health. That is not in our interest, but it's kind of who we are. That's why there are scandals when we find out that our military desecrated dead bodies of our enemies. It's because it violates our values. It makes us upset to know that our guys did that. That is not in keeping with, we say things like, who we are. That's what we're talking about, right? That's why we do something that is not in our interest, because it reflects our values. In the United States, we had a scandal with torture, right? Now, the reason we tortured offshore and the reason we tried to keep it a secret is because we knew it violated our values. If it was well within our values, we would be totally open about it and we'd just do it back home. We hide things that we know are uncomfortable and violate our values. In other words, you don't have to think very hard about whether this is in our values or not. We know. We know, right? Now, our interests lie down here. So we make decisions every single day, right? New client. Should we take their business? Sure, they're going to pay us a ton of money. Take it, right? New ad campaign. What should we say in it? Hey, we can use clickbait and we can drive sales hard over here. And we make all these decisions based on what numbers are. And we're making all decisions that are in our interest. And those are the arguments we make. We make financial debates, and we don't consider this stuff, right? Now, in a vacuum, any one of these decisions may be just fine. But the problem is when we pull back and we look at all of our decisions, nobody knows what we stand for because we are all over the place. That is perceived by employees and as customers, and by customers, as selfishness. In other words, as highly tuned social animals, which we are, we will perceive this behavior as not trustworthy, and we may do business with you. That's called transaction. But we will never give you our loyalty, and we will never trust you. Employees are the same way. I will work for you as long as you keep paying me, but I will be open to other opportunities elsewhere, and I will not give you my best and brightest because I don't know that I'm safe here, because I see the way you make decisions. Now, if we make values-based decisions, means we run all of our decisions through here first, Occasionally, we might make less money than we could if we made that decision. Occasionally, we make mistakes. But what starts to happen is all of our decisions start to look mostly consistent. And if you pull back, everyone can say, aha, I know what you stand for. I know what you believe. They use words like authentic, or they say you have high integrity, or you are of high moral fiber or character. All of these words that we use to describe people, we use to describe companies as well. I trust you. Knowing very little other than I know how you make decisions. So take us, for example, right? We work with some very dysfunctional companies, but at the core, the executives who bring us in are trying to do the right thing. We have been offered to go work with companies who, when we talk to them, we know they only want to use our stuff to drive short-term gains. And they offer us a lot of money to work with them. We turn them down because we have a vision. And our vision is a people-based vision. And we want to work with companies that will transform their cultures, that will produce cultures that people are inspired to come to work every day. And if I help this company, I may help them drive their numbers, but it won't help advance my vision for the short-term gain of only the money, which I can make somewhere else. And if I'm going to tell my people this is our vision and they see me make these decisions and I cannot justify them, then what starts to happen is they start to think that what I was saying was bullshit. And then they stop trusting everything I say, even if I'm saying the right thing. That's the point. Our friends are the same way. If our friends only made decisions based on their own interests, do you think you would trust your friends? Right? If they would never come to your house, you always have to go to their house because they're lazy. There's no sacrifice. There's no giving. Everything's in their interest. We wouldn't want to be friends with them. In other words, as these highly trained and highly tuned social animals, we're constantly evaluating the words, the actions, the behaviors of politicians, of executives, of our colleagues, of our friends, and of companies to determine whether we can trust them and work with them. We will do transactions with them, but this is where loyalty, love, and this is where the infinite game lies. It's the only way to build an infinitely built company. It has to be built on values, on the intangibles. I spent time with the United States Marine Corps, and they talk all the time. They actually say these words. They say, the reason the United States Marine Corps is what it is, the reason its culture is so strong, is because of the intangibles. They literally talk about the intangibles all the time, which are the emotional bonds, the love, the vision, the standards to which they hold each other. The intangibles. We don't like the intangibles in business. We love the tangibles, which is fine. Then you have to be satisfied that when you run out of the will or the resources to play, you move on, right? There is no winning the game of business. Okay. So that's what I'm working on.
Love it, Simon. Thank you very much indeed for that. I love replacing the word profit with freedom, and may we all be the freest people in the world.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
beautiful. Okay, so Amol Rajan is our interviewer for today. Amol is the BBC media editor. He reports on key breakthroughs in the media industry, whether they're global M&A, disruptive technologies. But he doesn't just report on them, he also analyses them and tells them what it means for the viewers, their world, and the world around them. He is also a massive cricket fan, so much so that he wrote a book once called Twirly Men, The Unlikely History of Cricket's Greatest Spin Bowlers. Not too much cricket today, Amol, but welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Simon. I'm going to see how long it takes me to get the word intangibles onto the BBC News. I think I can be able to do it within a week. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the stuff that you've said so far, and then we're going to talk a bit more broadly about your book, Start With Why, and about leadership. Does that sound good?
Sure.
Excellent. So can we just understand, you mentioned Apple, the company Apple, which is a good company to analyse, given it's the wealthiest company in the world. And I just want to try and understand that in terms of your finite and infinite axes. Now, Steve Jobs said before that he died that the genius of what he achieved was that he never had an original idea, because there were music players before there was an iPod, and he designed an iPod that was 3 clicks to your favourite song. There were desktop computers before there was an Apple Mac, but an Apple Mac was the best to use. And there were smartphones before the iPhone, and he just took brilliant ideas and he made them much, much better. So was Steve Jobs playing the finite game because he was crushing the competition, or was he playing the infinite game because he just did his own thing?
So Jobs had a very clear vision, and it was to give the individual the power to stand up to Big Brother. He was at his heart a rebel. He grew up in Northern California during the Vietnam War, which is where the beginning of the anti-establishment revolution sort of started. Yeah. And that was his childhood. And so he really stood for the individual standing up to the man.
And he had a big spiritual side. He was a Buddhist at times.
Yeah. And if you look at the decisions he made decisions like this. He ran decisions through his vision before he got to the interests, right? So there's a very famous story of when he went to Xerox PARC. Do you know this one? So Jobs, they just come off the success of the Apple I and the Apple II. It's already a big company. He's already well known. He's already the darling of business. And their next big push is going to be into a technology they called the Lisa. That was their next computer that they were going to launch. And just as executives do, they visit each other's companies. And Jobs and a few of his colleagues went to visit Xerox PARC. And Xerox showed them a new technology that they had invented called the graphic user interface, right? Now, remember, Jobs believed in the individual standing up to Big Brother. So the reason they made their computers beautiful was not arbitrary. It's because if they were pretty looking, you'd put them in the living room. If they're ugly, you put them in the basement. And you're more likely to use something that's in the living room than if it's in the basement, right? The reason you make them simple is because more people can then use them. And so when he saw this thing called the graphic user interface, he thought, this is a better technology. It's a leapfrog to make it easier for more individuals to access the power of the personal computer than what we have in the Lisa.
So that's an infinite game because he's thinking about what's right for the long term rather than what his competition
And as they left Xerox PARC, Jobs says, we have to invest in this. And his colleagues said, you're crazy. We've invested millions of dollars, millions of man hours already in the Lisa. If we do this, if we invest in this, we're going to blow up our own company. To which Jobs replied, better we should blow it up than someone else. That decision became the Macintosh. That decision was the Macintosh, of which, remember, Windows is an interface designed to copy the Macintosh. In other words, he completely changed the way computers work to the point where now any individual can easily use a computer. And he always made decisions that way. He made decisions always empowering the individual. So he was asked a question about the movie industry, cinemas, and the decline of cinemas. And he replied that the cinemas were making the same mistake, the movie industry was making the same mistake that the music industry made, which is the music industry falsely believed that their customer was Tower Records and Virgin Megastore, and not the person who actually spent money on buying the album. He says, you've confused your customer with your distribution channel. And it's the same in television. The wrong people have the influence. His priority was the person who spent the money.
And the disbursement of power. When Steve Jobs died, Apple on their homepage put up a video of him in which he talks about his favourite quote from Wayne Gretzky, an ice hockey player. And he says that his favourite quote is that he doesn't go to where the puck is, he goes to where it's going, i.e. anticipation is everything. And that chimes with what you were saying about the trend. It's about planning for the trend. What do leaders, of which there are many gathered here today, what do leaders need to do to understand the trends in their industry better? Because it's very easy to say, this is where this business or this is where this market is going. Mm-hmm. It's actually, that's what everyone else is doing. So how can you get ahead of a trend in the way that Steve Jobs was able to look at where the puck is going?
So trend data is very dangerous. Because all it does is report a trend. It doesn't report if it's positive or negative.
And everyone else has got it.
And everybody else has got it. So for example, kids these days are all using apps to do everything. We should make more apps. But nobody says it's healthy. Right? In the 1980s, you needed to do cocaine to get through the business day. That's a trend. That's a trend.
Is that really true?
Cocaine usage was up in the 1980s. In businesses, if you worked in an investment bank, you'd know.
Yeah. No, I was, I was definitely not doing that in the 80s.
So the point is, it's a trend.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we should invest in it, right? So trend data is, I think, the way people rush towards a trend because they think that's where the market is going is very dangerous because it's incredibly unstable information.
But you have to, as a leader, anticipate where your market is going and make 3- and 5-year plans.
And the way you do it is with vision, right? So for some reason, somebody keeps telling me that my publisher said this to me, that I'm good at understanding the zeitgeist. And he's wrong. I have no clue about what people are thinking. All I know is where I want to go. That's it. As I said before, I have a vision of a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired to go to work, feel safe when they're there, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. So I can make certain guesses and predictions about things I have to do to get there.
Yeah, but on what basis do you make your vision? So if there's someone here who works in thought leadership in consumer brands, where does their vision for where the industry is going come from? Is it come from conversations that they have with people here? Does it come from an understanding of their business and their consumers? Where does that vision come from? Because I'm sure lots of the leaders here today are thinking, how can I anticipate where my business is going 3 to 5 years from now and get ahead of the competition?
So you're asking me, you're putting the cart before the horse, right? Vision is an internal thing, right? It is the world that you want to live in, right? Jobs was the rebel, and he always was against big business, right? All the visionaries that we know have some sort of personal experience and imagine a world that is different to the one they live in now and will use their businesses to help build that world. That doesn't mean they're the only ones doing it, but what makes them a leader is they're the one leading towards that place, right? So vision has to come from you. If you're the founder of a company, your business is not the only way you do it. What if you quit your business and start another one? It doesn't matter. They should all be contributing towards this vision. And you're not the only one doing it, but if you're the one preaching it and you're using your company to advance it, that makes you the leader. Yeah. That's why everybody copies you. But it's not about anticipating the market trend, which is an interest thing you're asking me. It's got to start with values. The interests come second. They're definitely there, but they definitely come second.
Values. Yeah. I wonder if the implication of what you're saying is that Steve Jobs, I mean, we're right to focus on him because he was a visionary, was an effective leader but a bad manager. And let's talk a bit about the difference between leadership and management, because there is a sort of theory that people here may subscribe to, that leadership is that vision thing. You know, it's a destination, it's a shining city upon a hill that you want to get to.
Yeah.
And management is the daily sort of trudge of going up the mountain.
Yeah.
Is it often the case in your experience that you do get people who are bad leaders and good managers, or vice versa?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's rare that you get someone who's both an excellent leader and an excellent manager?
Incredibly rare. I'm a terrible manager.
What do you like to work for?
You have to ask the people who work for me.
What do you like to work for?
What?
I'm asking you what you like to work for.
What I like to work for?
No, yeah, what do you like to work for? What sort of manager are you?
I'm very laissez-faire.
You sound like a great manager to me.
Yeah, but sometimes to a fault.
Leadership versus management. What's the difference?
So it's like mum and dad. It's a partnership. You want the visionary and you want the builder. You want the leader and you want the manager. It's not a better or worse thing. And we have a misconceived notion of hierarchy in most businesses, which is CEO is usually the number one job, and then CFO or COO is usually the number two job. That's how we think of it. And a lot of CFOs or CEOs are hoping one day to get the number one job. But it's not 1 and 2, it's 1 and A.
Yeah.
They're different skill sets. And in every single C-level job, we have articulated what the job responsibility is. So you have your chief operations officer, chief operating officer, chief financial officer, chief technology officer. What the hell is a chief executive officer? It's the only job that has no description in it. It should be a CVO, a chief visionary officer, someone who is responsible for setting the long-term vision and instructing my finance guy, my operations guy, my tech guy to help figure out all the systems that we need to get there. And all the great visionaries that we've had ostensibly have been not CEOs, but CVOs.
But it's fascinating what you say, because I think a CEO's job, as far as I understand it, in my knowledge of business, which is obviously very limited, given I shut a newspaper, CEOs are
You didn't see that trend coming?
No, we did. So Andy Mullins, who sat in the front, who's my boss for some of that time, and there's a reason many of you here did see the trend coming. In fact, he is a visionary leader. He came up with the idea to launch a new newspaper called He came up with the idea of taking the Evening Standard free. I think the long-term trend in daily printed news is it's kaput, and so we went online, which was a smart thing to do. But as I understand it, executives, CEOs and people that execute plans are people ultimately have to make decisions. And I spend a huge amount of my life, probably too much, reading political biographies.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that if you look at the names of political biographies, if you read them, what they tend to be all about is the absolute avalanche of decisions that political leaders have to make.
Yeah.
Tony Blair's big shtick is that if you're a political leader, you can make a decision or you can not make a decision. But if you don't make a decision, that still has consequences. Barack Obama would often say in interviews that what struck him most when he became president was just how many decisions he had to make each day. George W. Bush's memoirs are called Decision Points. Hillary Clinton's are called Hard Choices. The people in this room have to make decisions all the time, probably a huge number of decisions. how does that graph, or those two graphs there, help us make decisions?
Well, that's exactly the point, which is, what are we running the decision set through? And do we run it through our values first, or do we run it through our interests first? The United States is a bad example because, from a decision-making standpoint, foreign policy has been an absolute disaster for the past 20 years. I don't care, Republican or Democrat, where it's been too much interest-based, and look what's happened. The world doesn't trust America like it used to. And America is not seen as the holder and keeper of democracy, like it used to in the past. Even the relationship between this country and the U.S. is weaker than it's ever been, which is not good, right? So I would argue that American foreign policy, if we're using foreign policy, hasn't followed that. We haven't been making decisions through that filter, but that is how effective decisions are made, I believe, which is they have to run through values and cause first.
But it's interesting because when you mentioned that part of your very engaging talk, I was thinking there's a lot of decisions, a lot of businesses, which may not be the businesses that you would work with, but there's a lot of businesses, perhaps some of them are represented here today, where actually doing the short-term thing for financial gain is smart business. It is smart. It is, you do need, because you're working at a public company which reports quarterly, because you need to keep shareholders on side. Maybe you're worried about losing your job if you don't hit a certain target in March or April or May. Isn't there a fundamental conflict between the demands of some businesses, which are short-term interest-based, and your vision of business?
So the argument you're making is short-term based companies should make short-term based decisions, which means they'll last for the short term. I'm not actually making an argument of any kind. I just wonder whether or not actually the reality is, maybe this is why you make the point, that I'm raging against reality. I think that the systems we have in play do not support capitalism. I think we have corrupted capitalism, which is capitalism at its best doesn't follow the rules that we follow today. The concept of shareholder supremacy was a theory proposed by a Harvard professor in the late 1970s, popularized in the 80s and 90s by basses like Jack Welch, right? The concept of using mass layoffs to balance the books, mass redundancies because we missed our numbers.
This is the Mitt Romney school of
right?
business.
Did not exist as a standard way of doing business prior to the 1980s. It was popularized in the 80s and 90s. Let's look at the 80s and 90s. These were boom years of relative peace without the internet, right? Now, that world does not exist. We no longer live in boom times. There is no longer relative peace, and the internet has profoundly changed the way business operates today. In other words, what worked then cannot work now. GE needed a $300 billion bailout in 2008 because that company was not built to last. What I'm saying is the systems that we consider normal ways of doing business, shareholder supremacy, using mass redundancies, and other philosophies in how we incentivize people, how we hire people, et cetera, they are outdated and outmoded, and they are a race to zero. And the companies that continue to embrace those philosophies, big or small, are struggling with engagement, they're struggling with innovation, they go through people like nobody's business, and the executives keep getting fired or quitting, right? Unceremoniously. And by the way, their shareholder value is unstable. Remember, shareholders are a fickle bunch. If you do well, regardless of what you stand for, they'll invest in you. And if you do badly, regardless of what you stand for, they'll abandon you. But it's the shareholders who believe what you believe that stick with you through thick and thin while the others come and go. People don't drop Disney because Disney had a bad quarter. The fickle do, but there's loyal ones to those businesses. All the companies that I mentioned, Southwest, Costco, the companies we love, they have a solid base of really, really loyal investors who are not there because of the whims. It's because Berkshire Hathaway does not report quarterly because there's no legal requirement to do so. It's just a matter of convention. Now, I don't see people abandoning Berkshire Hathaway, even if they have a bad year.
Exactly. This resonates with the central argument of your book, Start With Why. And I think it's worth just for a moment for people who haven't read that book, though they will do by the time they're finished today, or haven't seen your TED Talk on it. Could you just briefly explain the three circles of what, how, and why, and how starting with why helps you build a good business? Because I think it's very pertinent to what you're saying about values-driven decisions.
So every single organization on the planet, even our own careers, always function on the same three levels. What we do, how we do it, and why we do it. Everybody knows what they do. These are the products we sell, the services we offer. Some know how they do it. These are the things we call our unique selling propositions, or our differentiating value propositions, whatever it is, the things that we think make us stand out from the crowd. But very, very few people and very, very few organizations can clearly articulate why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make money. That's a result. By why, I mean what is your purpose, what is your cause, what is your belief? Why does your company exist? Why did you get out of bed this morning? And why should anyone care? And what I learned is that organizations or leaders that start by telling you what they do are less able to inspire people to do business with them, inspire loyalty, where those who start with why, whether it's Steve Jobs or Mahatma Gandhi, are able to command loyalty and are able to innovate in ways that others cannot. And the reason I say that every company functions this way is because the model is not based on some highfalutin management theory. It's based on the biology of human decision-making. This is how the brain works. That when you start with why, it talks to the part of the brain that is responsible for decision-making and feelings, like trust and loyalty, but it's not responsible for language, which is why it's hard to put into words. Whereas the part of the brain that controls rational, like numbers and product and benefit and features, doesn't affect decision-making.
But when you say start with why, I hear, as a sort of suspicious journalist, I start with why should I believe you? So if you say, you know, Google has this phrase, don't be evil. There's a lot of people out there at the moment, particularly people that work in the UK newspaper industry, who feel that they're being undermined fatally by Google, who'd say, Google say don't be evil. That's their why, you know, because we want to be a values-driven organisation. Or take Facebook. Whenever I speak to Facebook, Facebook say, we are a mission-driven company. We're about an open and connected world. And a lot of people say, well, that's just marketing nonsense. So my question to you is, even if someone can give us an account of why should we believe them? How do we know it's not just empty marketing jargon and spin?
Your cynicism is well placed. You
should be a journalist.
Well, I'm inherently cynical. I think that's sort of...
I thought it said author and optimist somewhere. Have we been sold a puppet?
Yeah, I can still believe that the world is good. Which is, you're right. All those pieces that I talk about, why, how, and what, all have to be there. You have to have balance in all three. You have to have purpose and vision. You have to have values and guiding principles. And you have to have, ultimately, decisions, product and service, and numbers that prove it. So if you only talk about the why but you don't actually do it, it is just marketing jargon. I 100% agree. If all you have is good product but you don't have any sense of purpose or cause, it's just an unstable thing, and it's a very hard thing to differentiate based on features and benefits for any length of time, and it doesn't command loyalty. It just drives transactions. And when you have all three of those things perfectly in line, then it hums. Now, arguably, I hate the fact that Google describes itself as do no evil, because the human brain has no capacity for negative, and I can prove it to you. You know, don't think of an elephant, right? Can't do it, right? So we don't have the capacity for negative thought. We only have the capacity for positive thought, which is why you're supposed to tell your children. You're not supposed to tell your children, don't eat on the couch. You're supposed to tell your children, eat at the table, right? You tell them what to do. So I would prefer that Google say, do good, rather than do no evil. It's a bias. But their why is not do good. Their why is to organize the world's information.
Yeah, I mean, Google is Alphabet is a very, very powerful company. But are they powerful because they're a values-driven company, or are they better software engineers who develop better technology at making search results appear very quickly, and they've built the world's most effective advertising machine around it? I mean, I just want to dig down into your analysis of why there's a causal link between values-driven companies and long-term success.
So it's Sergey and Larry are both still there. So we won't really know until they leave.
Yes, I was going to ask about the bus, yeah.
Right? I mean, we didn't, like, Sam Walton built an amazing company and he left. He died. And it ran okay after the first CEO who took over from him, because that guy worked right under him. By the time you got to Mike Duke, it's a horrible, horrible company that people hate working for and hate working with. So the people who work at Google seem to really like Google, you know? They seem to have a more sophisticated way of hiring. You've seen their want ads. They're different. They're different. They're trying to hire to values. Have they made missteps? Absolutely. Are they perfect? Far from it. Are there things that I wish they would do differently? Yes. But I can't really tell you until those founder leaders, just like I was saying before, are gone, and let's see what kind of company they've built. I had the chance to sit down with Richard Branson, and I asked him, how should we judge you when you die? I said, what did you do at Virgin that if I were to look at your company and say, he was a good man, like tell me what about your culture that you built that I should judge you by? And he didn't even pause. He didn't wait a second. He said, do not judge me by anything that I've done at Virgin. You judge me by the quality of my children. Right? Which is a very infinite perspective. And although he didn't talk about it, I got the distinct sense that unless his kids are involved in Virgin, I don't think he really cares if Virgin survives for 100 years beyond his death. Unless his kids are involved in it.
I'm just thinking, my son's an absolute nightmare, so I've got work to do, haven't I? I've got work. Yeah, crying endlessly. Yeah, I need to.
How old's your kid?
He's just turned 1.
Okay, I think you're okay. I think you are okay.
Let's talk briefly in the time that we've got left about...
We'll have this interview again in 19 years.
Yeah, exactly. God, well, maybe not. Let's talk briefly in the time we've got left about, you mentioned the word entrepreneurs, and one of the things that I'm fascinated by, and I know, having seen your talks and read some of your books, you're fascinated by is what it takes to be an entrepreneur. If you could describe, I know you've talked in broad terms about sustainable businesses driven by values, but if you could describe what are the sort of characteristics that have tended to make effective entrepreneurs in your time, that would be wonderful. And there was a very, very famous academic paper in the 1980s published in England that said that the qualities of an entrepreneur were a bit like that of a white-collar criminal. It was someone that's sort of mischievous, liked looking for opportunities, and sometimes had a sort of slightly naughty sense. So what are the qualities that you think it takes to be an entrepreneur is one thing. And the other thing is, how could you encourage the people here to have the confidence to take risks? There are a lot of people who grow through a business, they've been there 20, 30 years, they've always dreamt of being the CEO, and they've come through the finance division or whatever it might be, and they get to the top, and they're at the top, and they're in charge, they've got all this power, and actually they become very cautious because they want to consolidate that power. So how do you encourage people to have the courage and confidence to take risks in order to make their business continue growing? Related questions.
So let's do the first one. So I think the word entrepreneur is bandied about too loosely. That not everyone who owns a small business is an entrepreneur. There are small business owners and there are entrepreneurs.
What's an entrepreneur?
And you can find entrepreneurs in big companies. It doesn't mean that they're small business owners, right? I think entrepreneurs are problem solvers. I think
rather than risk takers.
Yeah. I think fundamentally there are plenty of risk takers, I think, who are entrepreneurs. There's a risk taker if you're a small business owner, right? You went out to start the business, but they're not the same, I don't think. And entrepreneurs are those ones who they're constantly looking to solve problems. And that's where I think they perceive opportunity or the mischief that you describe. I don't think inherently it's a sense of mischief. They're not trying to stir the pot for the sake of stirring the pot. I think that they see something and they're like, we can make that better, or we can fill that hole. And that's very much the way the famous entrepreneurs, the Elon Musks and the Richard Bransons operate. They see gaps. They see things that don't work.
As did Jobs.
As did Jobs. They see things that could be better. Elon Musk was just interviewed by Chris Anderson at TED last week. And Chris Anderson, sort of near the end of the interview, it's online, go watch it, it's really great. Chris Anderson asks Elon Musk something to the effect of, why are you doing all these things? Like, why don't you just stick with Tesla and be done with it? Like, why do all the other stuff? And you look at, and Musk, you can see this look on his face, and he takes a long time to answer. He actually doesn't understand the question. He cannot understand why you wouldn't do that. And he sort of gets emphatic, which for Elon Musk is pretty amazing, because he doesn't get emphatic. But that's basically what it is. He gets emphatic and says, because I want to live in a world that's better than this, or words to that effect, where I'm not, where the world that we're living in right now makes us unhappy. Why don't we want to live in a world that makes us happy? He gets sort of, he can't understand, and again, it's vision first. And that's why he doesn't understand why you wouldn't try and solve problems.
Yeah, and how can you encourage those who are the more cautious amongst those gathered here today? How can you persuade them that sometimes being cautious is actually the more risky path? And how can people develop the confidence and the courage to take risks?
So, I've learned that courage is not some deep internal fortitude, that you don't dig down deep and find the courage, That courage is external. Courage comes from the relationships we have with those around us. A partner in business, a personal relationship, our team, right? That's why we want to build good cultures, because our team believes in us, which gives us courage to do difficult things. So a trapeze artist, a world-famous trapeze artist, would never try a brand new death-defying act for the very first time without a net, right? Now, all that courage, they're the world's greatest trapeze artists, but they need something external before they do something very dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's the same for the rest of us. Exactly. So when we have someone who says, I believe in you, I got your back, even if this doesn't work out, I'm here with you.
And also when you survive. So were you a nervous public speaker before you became a famous public speaker?
Sure. Yeah,
You don't seem it.
No, I mean, you get better at things with practice.
Exactly. I've got one final question before we break for a comfort break. We talked a lot about vision. It's about inspiring action to change, people to take control of their business. What if there are people, some of them, who are looking slightly more vacant right now, who think, actually, do you know what? I've got a big problem, which is that I don't have a vision. What if you don't know your values? What if you've just gone through a career sort of basically trying to do what your boss wanted you to do, make sure you didn't stab anyone in the back? What if can people find a vision?
Yeah.
And are there some people who basically get through life without a vision and some who do? Because I just worry that it's a bit easy to talk about inspiring change and this big vision. Actually, there's a lot of people who go through life thinking, I want to go home and watch Strictly Come Dancing or MasterChef and make sure my kids are in bed by 8 o'clock. Maybe some people don't do the vision thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. And I think society and folks like me put an unfair pressure on people to have a vision, right? And I think that's true. We're not all Steve Jobs, and we don't all have big, world-changing visions, to your point. I do believe, however, you can find a vision, right? In other words, it doesn't have to be yours. It can be someone else's. We found Martin Luther King. We found Mahatma Gandhi. We found Steve Jobs. We found Richard Branson, Elon Musk, the visionaries. And people go, I love his vision. So organize your business around that. Right? You don't have to have a vision, but I do believe you have to find one. People find it in religion. You follow whatever you follow, right? You become a follower of. So you can say, I believe, and you can say theirs is yours. I believe in that. And we're organizing our company around helping to build that world.
Yeah.
So I don't believe you have to have one. I do believe you have to find one.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And it doesn't have to always operate at a macro level. It absolutely can operate at a micro level, right? It can be the way you raise your family, the way you treat your friends. You raised another point, which is getting in, when people get more senior, they sort of seem to become more risk averse. My own findings mirror that, which is when people are young in their careers, every new promotion is like the most incredible thing in the world. And the first bonus, and the first client you win, the first big business you land, the first big product you launch, it's like the most amazing thing in the world. And that thrill keeps you excited to stay in the career, keeps motivated. But after you've had a bunch of bonuses and written a bunch of articles and been on TV a bunch, it's whatever. It's not what drives the excitement anymore.
Well, I still quite like it, actually.
Right? Yeah, you might enjoy it, but the thrill is gone. Or at least it's subdued, right? You don't get the same nerves as you're getting wired up to go on TV, It becomes part of the process. And what I start to see is executives later in their careers actually struggle to find the same inspiration that they found when they were younger, and so they resort to the things that inspired them when they were younger. I remember the first $1 million we made, so if I make another $1 million. I remember the first big client, so I land another big client. And they keep trying to repeat what worked when they were younger that no longer works when they're senior. And I find senior executives to be less fulfilled and less inspired by their work than junior people.
Well, that won't be the case after they come back from this comfort break and they've asked you lots of questions.
There we go.
Can we thank Simon for what he said so far? Thank you.
And also, can we thank Amol very much indeed for a brilliant...
Thank you. Thanks very much.